Well, there are times when we are exclusive. There are times when we exclude other people from us. Sometimes we do that intentionally, and sometimes we do it unintentionally. When I was in high school, I was in a youth group. It was a smaller youth group, not a humongous youth group with hundreds of people. I didn't want to be in a youth group with hundreds of people. I wanted to be in a youth group where people loved me and people knew me and where I had a place. And so I was in a really great youth group. And one of the things that we did every year, we had our spring break always Holy Week. It was actually Easter break. Is that what you all did in Texas? Because that's what we did in California. And so it was Easter break, and it was always, whenever Easter was, it was always the week before. And so we always spent our youth group would go to this camp, and it was in a different district in the Methodist Church than ours. But we would go to this camp, and we would do work to get the camp ready for that summer's camps. And so we would do like plumbing stuff, and we would paint, and we would weed, and we would do all of the grunt labor that the people who ran the camp didn't want to do. And so it was a great way to have Holy Week, because you would sacrifice and you would serve, and then Resurrection Day was so amazing because of all of that. Well, so I started going when I was in 7th grade, and I went all the way until I was in 12th grade, and it was such a powerful experience. And at the end of that week, the thing that we would always do on Saturday morning before we would drive back home is we would gather together and we would sit in a big circle, and we would go around the circle, and people would share with each other what the week meant to them. And so what would happen is that somebody would say, well, this was the best week of my life, and I met the greatest people, and I'm so sad to have to go back to school. And then the next person would talk, and they would say, well, I met Jesus this week, and they would go on. And then the next person would talk, and they would say something like that. Well, there was this, and it would kind of go around the whole circle, and different people would share powerful things. Well, this one year when I was in 10th grade, we went around the circle like that, and typical stories were going on, and we went all the way around the circle until we got to the last person. And the last person was somebody who had not been part of our youth group, and his grandmother had forced him to come on this trip. And she thought that if she forced him to go on this trip, then he would get to know the kids, and then he would want to come to youth group. And so it went around the circle, got to him, and when he spoke, he said, "This was the worst week of my life." He said, "You people were the meanest people I've ever been around." And we could not believe it. Our mouths just dropped. He said, when I would come up to you to have a conversation, you did not talk back to me. When I came up to you to throw a basketball, you wouldn't play with me. He said, when I would come with my food to sit at a table with you, you would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm holding that seat for one of my friends." He said, it was the worst week of my life, and we were totally floored. And we came to the realization that what we had done was we had excluded him. While we were having this really great time with each other, we had actually excluded this guy. There are times when we exclude people, sometimes unintentionally, like we did in that experience. But sometimes we exclude people intentionally because we say, well, that guy doesn't look right. And we say, we get away from that guy. Or sometimes we for safety, we think, okay, this person fits the description of somebody that is known to be dangerous. We will stay away from that person. And so we intentionally exclude people. We push people away. Well, the problem with excluding people is that we cut ourselves off from some amazing blessings. Jesus is seen to be with people who would normally have been excluded. And so the Pharisees and the scribes come to him. In the beginning of chapter 15, it says, "Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him." All the sinners and tax collectors, these are the people whom Jesus included that the rest of society was used to excluding. These were people that Jesus would have been well within his rights to have not included. and yet here he is with them. And so the Pharisees and the scribes come, and they're grumbling, saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." And Jesus, hearing what they're saying, knowing what's on their heart, he tells them 3 stories to respond to their grumbling. He says, let's imagine that there is a shepherd who has 100 sheep, and one of them gets lost and goes away. That shepherd leaves those 99, and he goes and he finds that one sheep, and he brings it back to himself, and he calls all of his friends together, and he says, let's have a party because I lost this sheep, and now I've got it back. And then Jesus tells a second story where he says, imagine a woman who has lost a coin. She sweeps her whole house and she searches her whole house. And when she finds that coin, she calls her friends over and says, let's have a party. I found what was lost. And then Jesus tells a third story. He says, there was a father who had 2 sons. He had 2 sons, and the younger of these sons comes to the father and he says, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. Now, it was not part of the custom of those days to ask for your inheritance before your parent had died, just as it isn't the case today. And so this was an audacious request. Father, give me what you will give to me when you die. In other words, he might as well have said, Father, I wish you were dead, because I would be better off if you were dead, because then I would have what I want to have. Father, give me what will be my share. And so this father, he gives it to him. And normally what would happen if a father had 2 sons is the younger son would get 1/3 of the inheritance, and the older son would get 2/3. So presumably the father sold off 1/3 of his land and gave that to his younger son, which would have reduced his ability to have an income, because now he's only got, he has 2/3 of his land left to work. And so the son takes that land and presumably he sells it, he takes the money, and he goes away. And he goes off to a faraway place, and he takes that money and he wastes it. He spends it, and it's all gone, and he has nothing left. And then he finds himself in such a bad state that he has to hire himself out to herd swine, to herd pigs. Now, we might presume that Jesus is telling a story about a Jewish family, because he was Jewish and he's speaking to Jewish people. And so if we imagine that this younger son is Jewish, what's a Jewish boy herding swine? Not kosher. He shouldn't be doing that. So this son, whom Jesus is describing, is a despicable character. He not only has dishonored his father, bringing shame to his family and shame to his village, he squanders the money, and now he's herding swine. And things get so bad that he begins to want the food that these swine are eating. He begins to imagine even eating the food that the swine are eating. And apparently, according to the Gospel of Curtis, this pig prays for him. That was fascinating. But he comes to his senses, and he starts to develop a plan. He says, I can go back to my father, and I can ask him to hire me as one of his servants, and then I can have food. I can have better food than what these pigs are eating. That's a good plan. And he starts to develop this little speech. He starts to rehearse this little speech. He's, Father, I have sinned before heaven and before you, and I would gladly be your servant. And he comes up with that plan, and he goes to his father. Now, apparently, in that time, if a person had brought that kind of shame to his village, this village would have met him with a party. But it wouldn't have been a party that you would have wanted. It would have been a party where people were ready to throw rocks. And so so what we hear is that the father is, he sees his son. He sees his son. And I have to imagine, I'm a father of 2 children, and I have to imagine that if one of my children had done this, had brought shame upon me and my family, and done this horrible thing and wasted all of the money that I gave them, I would not stop loving them, because I don't think it's possible to stop loving your children. And I can imagine that this father woke up every day and looked out on the horizon just hoping that his son would return. I have to imagine he would look out there and just pray, God, bring my son back. And so this one day, he sees his son out there. And what does he do? He runs to him. This was a very undignified act for a man of his stature to do. Men did not run, particularly a man of stature would not run. And in order to run, he wore a long robe, and in order to run, he would have to embarrass himself even further. And I can tell you, I wear this robe on Sunday mornings, and occasionally I have to run from one service to the next. And it is not easy. In fact, I don't advise it. In fact, what I've learned to do is to kind of take little tiny steps, because if you really, put out a stride, you'll trip. And so this father, in order to run, he had to lift up his robe, which would have exposed his legs, which would have brought even further embarrassment to himself. But his father loved his son so much that he was willing to put himself between the villagers who probably would have wanted to throw rocks at this boy and run out there. And this boy has in his head that he's going to say this speech and he's going to get back he's going to be able to get some food. But before he can even speak, his father kisses him. And a kiss is a symbol of forgiveness. Before the boy can even ask for forgiveness, he has forgiven him. And then the boy launches into his thing. He says, Father, I've sinned against you, and blah, blah, blah. And the father just cuts him off. Says, bring me a robe for him. Bring me the best robe, which is a symbol of distinction. Bring me a ring to put on his finger, which is a symbol of authority. He's saying, I'm giving him my authority. Bring me sandals to put on his feet, because the sandals are something only free people wear. Servants and slaves did not wear sandals. Put sandals on his feet. Kill the fatted calf. Let's have a party. The lost one has come home. And so they have the party, and they celebrate that this one who was lost has come home. Well, the older son who is the one who is on, he has the perfect grades, 4.5, and he's in the honor society, and he crosses every T and dots every I, and he knows the 23rd Psalm, he knows the Lord's Prayer, he goes to Sunday school every single week, and he never does anything wrong. He's the perfect older son. Anybody have one of those? Anyway, I have to imagine that when he comes and he hears this party going on, he's mad. Because when he finds out that this is for his younger brother, he's mad. That younger brother should be excluded from that village. That younger brother should be excluded from the family. He should not be in there with a party. And so he's angry about what his father is doing. And this father who loves these kids, loves the younger one enough to run and embarrass himself to go out there, loves his older son enough to leave the party to come talk to his older son. And he says, look, this is your brother. He was lost, but he's found. Come, join the party. And that's basically where the parable ends. So the scene ends, and the older brother is still outside of the party. And he's out there, and he's got a decision to make. Will he go into the party and stop this exclusive attitude against his brother? Or will he stay out there and be cut off? The scene where the one who was lost is now found and included, while the one who thought he was found is now outside and he's lost. Who is that older brother? The Pharisees. He's the Pharisees, the ones who grumble that Jesus is eating with people who should be excluded, people who don't deserve to be with Jesus. That older brother is any of us whenever we exclude anybody. That older brother is my youth group who mistreated that boy so badly. That youth group that I was in, the next year, we made sure to include everybody. We were so embarrassed by our behavior that from then on, we were an inclusive group, and anybody who came to the group was included. And in fact, there was somebody who we normally would have intentionally excluded. He didn't look right, and he came to our youth group, but we made sure that he knew he was welcome. And the wonderful thing about it was we were blessed, because what we discovered was that God loved him and created him in just as wonderful a way as he had created any of us. What we discovered was that he had things to offer to us that were wonderful and that we needed. And so by including him, we were blessed. This church is one of the most wonderful churches that I've been part of. It's the best church I've been part of. There are more loving people in this church than I have found to be in any one place. You all have been the most welcoming, wonderful group of people to me, but I've also heard that from other people, that they come and they visit and they are welcomed and they are loved and they are included. You are a wonderful, loving, inclusive church. But what I know is that there are lost ones on the horizon. There are lost ones running around Pasadena who don't know the love of Jesus. There are lost ones who have not yet experienced the grace of God. And what God wants is for people like us to do like that father did, to look out on the horizon and find those lost ones and bring them home. Imagine what could happen if this church became known as Party Central for the lost ones. Imagine what could happen if this church became known as the church that you can go to no matter who you are. What if this church became known as the church where if you are lost, if you are rejected, if you are so far down that you are thinking about eating pig's food, here's where you can go. Here's where you can find the love of God. Here's where you can find grace. Here is where people will love you and treat you as a brother. Imagine. Amen.